Hello everyone, welcome to Crayfish webinar. Good morning to those of you listening in the UK, and a good afternoon those of you from China, and a good day to those in the rest of the world. My name is Dexter, and I am here to support my founder today, who will be the speaker of this webinar. For those new to Crayfish and our webinar, the presentation lasts about 40 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes questions and answers at the end of these sessions. Anytime through the webinar, you can send the questions through by clicking the question button on your control panel during the presentation. And just quickly to introduce a bit about Crayfish, our company name is actually crayfish.io, which is also the domain of our platform, the first online marketing place, the marketplace in the world that's dedicated to providing Chinese business expertise on demand. I will tell you more about our platform and services at the end of this session. Now you have made up your decision that you want to go to China. Doing business in China, particularly for a startup or small company, may seem like a difficult thing to achieve, not least navigating the culture or trying to understand the Chinese innovation style. Now, I will pass on this topic to our founder, Ting Zhang, who is one of the leading China business experts in the UK. Ting Zhang, she has 20 plus years experience of UK-China international business, trade and investment. Now I'll pass on the topic this webinar to Ting. Welcome, Ting.
Thank you, Dexter. Hello, everyone. For those who are new to our webinar are very much practical and aimed at sharing knowledges and also best practices of doing business with China. So today we are going to talk about innovation. And innovation in Chinese is 创新, so it actually meaning create something new, and that's actually the word in Chinese means. And this is something I actually would like to start with for you to read. This was written about 12 years ago by Professor Peter James Williamson here at University of Cambridge. And he did a lot of case studies on the Chinese innovative companies, especially like Huawei. And this was what he thinks is coming. And certainly, this is true now. If you look at nowadays, Huawei has made very big in the international stage. It's one of the biggest Chinese brands in the world. And so if you look at its magical growth, so what was the most impressive thing about Huawei? So a lot of people are looking into that, but of course there are some of the characteristics that's very unique to the Chinese way of innovation, which we will also talk about in detail later. And another big innovation is WeChat, as many of you have heard, have used, or cannot live without. But in terms of WeChat, actually, there are also innovation within the WeChat. If you have not used the red envelope, hundreds of millions of Chinese using them. And in terms of how WeChat commercializes itself, that's also a very Chinese way of commercialization. So if we look at the Chinese way of innovation, there are some very obvious characteristics. For example, the Chinese way is very much sort of top down, meaning that the strategic direction has been decided at the top, whether this talk about the country or whether talk about company, but then it is very efficiently executed in the organization. And so in this case, Huawei is able to expand globally in less than, say, 10, 15 years. And that is very much because how the companies managed strategically with the visionary leader and a very efficient um, management team. And then there are also other Chinese innovations. They are able to reach massive market share at a phenomenal rate, mainly because the company that backing them and the company who invented them has access to massive user base, in this case, WeChat by Tencent. In fact, WeChat's core technology is not new to the world. There were similar technologies in other parts of the world, but WeChat made it because of the large market in China that people adopted at such a rate that it almost like overnight took over the market, and there's no one else could actually get into that space. And finally, the sort of strengths, we would say, in the Chinese way of innovation is that due to the strengths and financial resources of big companies, they are able to reach critical missions, i.e. the strategic objectives. For example, in this case, Alibaba has recently launched a academy called Damo Academy. The main purpose was to working on quantum computing and AI chips, which sounds quite unfamiliar for an e-commerce company. However, they are able to launch a quantum circuit simulator called Zhang, and that was within a short period of time, which was actually amazing for the industry they are in. So that just shows you that in China, things innovative technologies are able to get to that critical mass really quickly. And of course, there are other, we say cons, but it's very much sort of weaknesses or the incoherent characteristics of the Chinese way of innovation that are not so productive. For example, due to the pursuit for short-term economic gains, there is much less appetite to invest in long-term research, basic research, versus the more application-driven development and commercialization. So in China, the basic research investment counts for roughly 5%. So that is like 1/3 of that in the UK. And then sometimes because the top-down approach, it actually prevents some innovation from being developed, some real genuine innovative technologies, because they may be seen as not immediately getting a commercial benefit. Then there's also this lack of differentiation. In China, if you see something going very popular, whether it's products or services or entertainment, then they soon going to be a lot of like Me Too style of products and services as well. So now what I like to talk about is tech companies, because today I believe you come into the webinar, you want to know what's implication for you if you're a tech company or if you are an SME company with plans to do business with China. China is the largest market with a lot of money, lots of talent, but to tackle the market, what do this mean for you? So start with, I would like to tell you that China is now actually the world's second largest economy, soon to be overtaken US, to be the largest economy, according to some economists. If you go to China, you will see that China is a unique, or I would say perfect blend of ancient and modern society. You will have all this uh, wonderful city views of Shanghai Bund. But if you venture beyond the cities, you will see the lovely countryside and Chinese. Still, there's a lot of Chinese style of life going on in less sort of dense urban areas. And you may have noticed now there's a lot more Chinese culture and shows and kind of programs overseas. That's kind of China's soft power, that the Chinese government would like more people to understand Chinese culture, how its people live, how the country works, etc. And of course, there's a very important strategic initiative that you should all be aware, no matter what industry you are in. That is called the Belt and Road Initiative. And this is known as before One Belt One Road. It's essentially a blueprint for the Chinese government to see that to spread its economy all across the ancient Silk trade route and the Southeast Asia. Although having said that, even UK is on the list of the Belt and Road Initiative countries, where I think just at the end of that. So in terms of Chinese economy, one of the way to describe it is now becoming more and more a digital economy. In that China has now got about about half of the population is online, and in fact, the number of internet users are more than the population of Europe. So it's actually a tremendous size. Then there's also the mobile payment. In China, if you are traveling to China, you will find that you actually cannot find a place you can that do not accept mobile payment, and you don't actually need cash to go anywhere. You can just go around the whole city with one phone, because you are able to do everything on the phone now. And that has changed very rapidly in the last, say, 3 years or so. And of course, China is also the world's number one consumer market. All the major brands, whether luxury or home household brands, are in China. In fact, there's a booming middle class that's shaping the whole way how Chinese buy things and consumes. And there are, of course, different ways to look at the definition of middle class, but in general, about 1/3 of Chinese population are middle class, i.e. they can actually buy a car, they can afford a flat, and they can afford overseas travel, and they can afford also send the kids to private education. And without saying, China is probably the leading country when it talks about embracing social media to do e-commerce and to do commercial activities. And we can look at that later. So because of the China's fast growth in terms of its digital economy, but also in terms of its the way that the people purchase things, etc., there are these top industries booming in China from the industry side, whether it's a medical device or whether it's AI-driven applications, to e-commerce, which leads to the fast development of logistics. This produced hundreds of unicorns in China. In fact, I think China now produces probably almost more unicorn than the US. And in certain industries, for example, China has about 1/3 of the global share of industry robots that are used in automotive, electric, and metal industries. And also China is among the top 7 countries, including US, Japan, Korea, etc., for the worldwide spending on Internet of Things. And that is a very hot area for China to be developing as well. But China is not about just digital, it's also about industrial. In fact, the Chinese government has set up a huge ambition for the country to move up its value chain. And basically, there's this strategic ambition that for China to be having more content of that's truly China made, i.e. core materials. For example, if you're talking about phones, we're talking about the IC, content of it, not just the battery or the screen, etc. That's what the government wants. It wants to reduce the reliance on the foreign technologies, and there are these target sectors, particularly the government wants to focus on, especially like pharmaceutical, automotive, aerospace, semiconductor, robotics, and all this are very, very important. Actually, the Chinese Made in China 2025 has been very much the blueprint for the Chinese government since 2015. However, I think now you've seen less of it recently because the US trade war actually very much was based on the fear that the China Made 2025 will mean that more tech transfer are going to be happening in China from overseas companies, and that the foreign US companies will be in a more disadvantaged position because of the China's strategic move. And therefore, this seemed to be the China Made in China 2025 seemed to be lower profile in the short term. However, I believe that this is something the Chinese government wants to do, and this is what motivates the industry players in these sectors in a sort of longer term. So it is going to happen, especially with what's happening now with the US blocking access of core technology to Chinese companies. This actually has forced the Chinese companies to become more self-sufficient. And we have seen that China has invested into many of the core technologies that's been developed abroad to take them to China, to localize them, to make them into Chinese. And that is a trend in many of these sectors. And of course, in order to do that, the government needs to spend a lot more money in the basic research, in R&D. So you can see over the last 15 years, China has spent a lot more into this research and development, from about 2% globally to now 16% over 15 years. And the trend is going to be continue. So now I would like to say that it's not just the government spending money. There is also a reason why China developed so fast. It's because the Chinese people do work very hard. You can say, maybe in the West sometimes, or in other countries, people say work smarter but not harder. But I think in China, people work harder but also maybe smarter. So about a fourth of the world's engineering, scientists, workforce are Chinese. This include those working in overseas companies as scientists and engineers in Silicon Valley, in Cambridge, in Germany. You can see there's a lot of Chinese in those scientific and engineering functions, and so the Chinese workforce in those sectors are actually a lot much bigger than the US and growing very fast. So you may wonder, what are these pictures about? So this actually talk about this is actual real pictures taken from Huawei. As you know, Huawei has now overcome many of its competitors to become one of the largest suppliers in the world to network infrastructure, but also now on its smartphones. So apparently, that when people are recruited into Huawei, they're encouraged to work overtime, and most of them actually have got a mattress under the seat, and this is called the mattress culture. And even the founder himself sleeps in office, used to be at least, and to encourage that working hard culture. And of course, Huawei is also one of the employers that incentivizes our workforce through sharing all the company growth by giving its employees shares as well. So it's not like the people don't want to work half time overtime. They do want to work hard and contribute and make the company sustain that long-term growth. So this is very much Chinese way of hard working. I'm not encouraging everyone to go and buy a mattresses and put under the your office desk, but this is what's happening in China for real. But of course, for small SMEs entering to China, the labor cost now is on the rise, and combined with the high cost of operating in China, some companies starting looking at hiring freelancing workforce. So that's a trend to watch. And actually, here in Crayfish, we have a network of freelancers that are now working day-to-day basis for multiple clients on different projects, so that the cost of the talents are shared among companies. So that is actually good news for companies who are looking to get into China, but not having to bear all the cost of very expensive, highly skilled labor forces as well. So now, question I get asked a lot is, what are the challenges for SMEs to do business in China, and how do we deal with them? So one of the biggest risk is IP risk. And of course, there are cultural differences. There's also other things. So we can talk them through one by one. And for sure, if you're going to do business in China, it needs more than just enthusiasm. You actually need to understand how things work in China and how you prepare this. So if you look at IP side, so a lot of people are worried about IP, and it is understandable when you're a small company and all the value you have is actually embedded in your intellectual property. But good news is that China is actually now transitioning to an innovation economy. By that, we mean it's actually now one of the top countries in terms of its innovation rankings by the World Intellectual Property Office, and looking at the patent filings, for example, just for AI, for example, China is the top 3 in the world. But of course, China has been actually top in terms of general overall patent filings for the last 5 to 10 years. And then the country has also been strengthening of IP laws, as well as for better enforcement of these IP rights. There are IP courts, and then there's a lot more cases now being brought, not just always like foreign companies against Chinese companies. There are Chinese companies against other Chinese companies. There are Chinese companies against foreign companies. But these are all being dealt in a much more transparent and fair way. And of course, there's also Chinese unique way of dealing with this in administrative measures, which means you go and complain to one of the Chinese authority, the Industrial and Commerce Bureau, for example, will go and based on your evidence that someone in fact has infringed your trademark, for example, they are counterfeiting the bags of your brand down the street, they can go and shut it or force it to shut. And that is a unique way of how China addresses these problems. And one of the complaints China has had is the e-commerce platform like Taobao, etc., is full of counterfeits, and that is now also being brought into attention by the government. There's a lot more measures to ensure that the brands are checked and less counterfeit are being sold. The ongoing US-China trade war actually also helps to enforce, to better protect IP rights in China, in that there will be less kind of forced tech transfer in some circumstances. In the past, they do happen, and now the government is addressing that so that there will be less of that happening. Oops. Sorry. So now what I like to is quickly to talk about the cultural differences that you need to be aware when you're doing business in China. I have just scattered all this around because I don't think we have time or space to talk this in detail. But essentially, these are some of the key cultural differences. If you look at the left, the painting is a Confucius. Many of you probably recognize. He is the one that laid the foundation of the Chinese way of thinking, philosophy of Confucianism about 2,500 years ago, in that people do actually listen to the government. And in fact, there's a survey shows that Chinese government enjoys the highest trust level in the world. So when you do business in China, it's really important that you have a good relationship with Chinese government to actually spend some effort in building that reputation within the government network. So it would make it much easier for you to operate there. And in terms of doing business, on the left to right, you can see there's actually a real photo of one of our clients visiting China and play ping pong at a very quick lunch break with one of the important VIPs of the institution he was looking to work with. So making friends is very important, and also just going to visit China to meet people face to face. That is very important. But in the middle, if you see there's a yes or no sign, and what does that mean? I often get asked by clients to say, I've sent this email to China, I've not got a response. What do I do? I've sent a few emails by now. What do I do? So first, a Chinese way of communication, people don't use email nowadays. They use WeChat. Which if you don't have one, get yourself one, because that would help you to get personal and get frequent communication with China. But if after even very frequent WeChat messages, you still don't get answer, which that just means no. But your Chinese counterpart or your partner or your customer, they just don't want to make you lose face by saying no to your face. So if you don't get an answer after persistent sort of chasing, then maybe that's a no. And then there's this confidential information concept in China. I think from what I have seen in China, people don't really treat the confidential information seriously. So you are very likely to get it signed. But it's culturally, people like to share things with their friends. It's a way to build trust as well. So if it's really important for you, particularly it's your core tech information, confidential information, do not share it. And because Chinese language is very different, so if you do need to communicate to your key customer or partner, very important information should be translated into Chinese, and make sure it's the right character, i.e. you use the Chinese simplified characters rather than the traditional characters. But nowadays you have many ways to translate. You could use machines, you could use freelancing translators. such as you can find on our platform. You can also use agencies. Whatever you do, take that in control. Don't leave it to other people to do it, because only you know what you want to convey, and have it double checked by industry expert if they're really technical. So some other takeaway for this session is that when you do business with China, as it's such a large market, for a foreign company, especially a small, you really should work with a partner, at least one. And finding that partner is really important. Do not just go with anyone who happened to be recommended to you or happen to be approaching you from an exhibition or internet. Actually do some proper search. Find one that is best to represent you in your sector. Sometimes size doesn't always matter. If you're a small company, don't go with very large companies as your partner all the time. There may be certain times that large partners is indeed your better choice. But in other cases, for small companies, much better to work with a slightly smaller company, which is much more friendly to work with in terms of the decision-making process, in terms of the the people culture, and also that they can give you a lot more attention as a smaller company, rather than put you, with hundreds of products they're selling, and then you do not get enough attention to actually crack the market at the beginning. And trust is really important for the Chinese company and for doing business in China in general. So you need to spend some time doing that and make sure you are persistent, i.e. you should visit China multiple times and show your face to talk to the important people. This can include your potential customers, but also government officials, as well as other stakeholders, for example, industrial expert, academic expert, to actually look at ecosystem and build your reputation in that ecosystem, so that when you are ready to sell your products or services, you are going to get a warm response from the market. And remember, China is a quite bureaucratic country, and doing business there actually does take a lot of time. As for example, if you're looking to set up a company, you need to allow for 3 months at least. Sometimes it takes longer. Although there are other free trade zones, there are new free trade zones in Shanghai and Shenzhen and other places as well, that you could speed up that if you fall into the category that are encouraged by those free trade zones. For example, financial services, fintech, and a certain aspect of R&D, etc. So check it out. When you go to China, take time to research where is the best to set up, and allow the time for the operation to actually get to the stage you want to. I mentioned the forex control here because it's something often get forgotten, particularly if you are a small company when cash flow is really important for you. If you are, for example, licensing a software to China, i.e. if you don't have a physical product to pass the customs, it would take you typically at least 30 days, sometimes longer. Even I have seen companies take 90 days to go through the process of the approval at the China's state administration of foreign exchange, then go through the bank remittance process. So make sure you are prepared for that. As we talked about early on, China has this long-term vision of reducing the reliance of foreign technologies. So you might be wondering, in that case, are we all going to be not wanted in the long term? So that's an interesting scenario to think about. So for a company that's developing technology, one of the ways to work with China is to work as a partner, to align your interest with the country's interest, so that you actually are there with the Chinese partners for long term. So you could, for example, help with your technology to integrate it into the overall product development, so that you always focus on your product and your development. And so when Chinese products move on to the next generation, your technology also gets move on to next, so that you will always be able to supply. But in the meantime, everything happens so quickly. It's a very sort of dynamic place to do business. So you need to allow flexibility in that nothing is set in stone, whether it's arranging a meeting, whether it's signing certain clauses in the contract. You need to be prepared to be flexible if the situation actually requires so. And that is also one way to build the trust and relationship with your Chinese partners, because they can see that you can be a long-term partner to work with to overcome those challenges. And finally, you need to be open-minded, because in the past, you were only thinking to sell into China or source from China. Now we see a lot more companies seeking strategic investment from China. So the Chinese partner, when they like what you do, they might become your investor. So now I would like to talk just a quick introduction about our accelerator program, Crayfish Accelerator Program. This is for help SMEs, particularly in the medical device, advanced manufacturing, and new materials. All those three are within the sort of government strategic sectors. So in those sectors, we have the Chinese investor already committed with money in the UK to invest in startups in the UK. Well, we could stretch to Europe if needed for these companies to actually be taken a much safer ride to do business with China, so that you have the money, but you also have the hand-holding from our company, from Crayfish, and we would bundle the services to help you to overcome all the challenges we talk about, whether it's language, translation, the cultural barriers, whether it's finding partners, talking to the Chinese government, all those, we are able to help through that process to get you to be successful. And there's also access to mentors, to free webinars, workshops. For example, if you want to learn more about culture, and if you are not far from Cambridge, we do have a cultural workshop and talking also about the Chinese talent this Thursday in Cambridge. You can find that information on our website event page. And then just also to summarize what Crayfish does, we actually provide full service for all things related to do business with China, whether it's those services you need, or whether you need connection to the important relationship in China, or whether you need capital as a startup, and also later to access to more capital that's needed to do business with China. And we deliver those services through both online with our innovative, the first in the world platform that enables you to actually reach out to many of the freelancing Chinese specialists who can help you do the work, as well as value for money Chinese service providers. But we also can help you tailor services as you need. There are also some fixed price packages that you can buy, for example, set it up in China and open up a WeChat account, etc. So we are here to help you smooth that journey for you to do business with China. So on that, I think we'll stop here, and we will give everyone some time to prepare questions.
Thank you so much to Ting. That was a really constructive presentation. Now here comes the Q&A section. Can we do a little bit of interaction? Can anyone listen to me? And if you can see on your control panel, there's a raise hand feature. Can you click that? Just let me see if anyone have some questions for Ting. Thank you so much for your response. Now we're allowed you to have 1 minute to type your questions using the Q&A feature. The countdown starts now. All right, I can see there are some few questions on the list. Due to the time limit, we can only answer 2 questions. The first one, how would you describe entrepreneurship in China? What is the difference between UK entrepreneurs and their Chinese counterparts? I'll pass it to Ting now.
That's a really good question. I think the Chinese people are naturally very entrepreneurial. Although in the past, we have seen less entrepreneurs because general people like to be employed. But now with the encouragement from the government and also the support mechanism, you can see that a lot more Chinese graduates going to set up their own businesses. I would say the main difference is that in China, the entrepreneurs typically are probably shyer to seek funding at the beginning, so they would get family and friends to support them, and rather than at the very beginning to go for institution money. This is also because in China there's less business sort of angel investment culture. Some of the Chinese investors have their fingers burned in the previous years investing in early startups. So now more money are investing into sort of later startup or scale-ups stage. So in China, to be an entrepreneur is actually much harder in that sense than in the UK because of less support, I think.
Thank you, Ting. Here's the second and the last question. What does a global tech startup need to know to enter China?
Well, I think we pretty much covered that in the slides. Most importantly is really to prepare and rather than just sort of go. Of course, you can always just go to China and feel the market and feel the vibe of the economy. But to do business there successfully, you really need to prepare and find the right partner and set up in the right way and find the right people to work with. So make sure all those elements are right, then you will be successful.
Thank you so much, Ting. Hello guys, so just to let you know, this webinar is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. It will be sent to your inbox with a link. So if you would like to revise about this webinar and listen to Ting again, you can go to our YouTube channel and click and watch. For now, if you have further questions, you didn't have time to fill in your questions in the Q&A section, you can send your questions to hello@crayfish.io. I hope you found this webinar and presentation helpful. Have a nice day. Thank you so much.